In the harsh wilderness of North Dakota Territory, where survival meant everything and hope seemed as scarce as rain, one moment of boyhood courage would awaken spiritual forces that had slumbered for generations. When 12-year-old Timothy Crawford risked his life to save a Lakota woman from certain death, he had no idea his sacrifice would ignite something ancient and powerful in her heart. What happened next defied every law of nature and understanding, as the woman he saved discovered within herself the spiritual strength to heal not just her own wounds, but the broken spirit of an entire people facing extinction. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the smallest acts of courage, and sometimes salvation comes through the most unexpected messengers. This is the incredible true story of how one boy's heroism awakened dormant spiritual power that would transform a dying village into a beacon of renewed hope and strength. Ready for a story that will restore your faith in the power of selfless courage? Hit that like button if you believe miracles happen through ordinary heroes. Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because tales like this prove that courage has no age limit and compassion knows no cultural boundaries. Drop a comment about unexpected heroes who changed your world. I read every single one. The year was 1881, and 12-year-old Timothy Crawford had been living with his trapper uncle on the edge of the Badlands for 6 months, when the harsh winter and his guardian's sudden death from pneumonia left him completely alone, in territory where survival challenged even experienced frontiersmen. His uncle's remote cabin provided shelter but no human contact, forcing the boy to develop self-reliance that would soon be tested beyond his years. Timothy's daily routine of checking trap lines and hunting small game had made him familiar with the rugged terrain surrounding his uncle's claim, though he carefully avoided areas where Lakota hunting parties might be encountered, according to warnings his uncle had repeated constantly. The recent tensions between white settlers and tribal groups had made the territory dangerous for anyone traveling alone, especially children. The sound of gunshots echoing across the frozen landscape broke the winter silence that had become Timothy's constant companion, the distant violence suggesting conflict between parties whose identities and motivations he could only guess. His uncle's warnings about avoiding trouble warred with curiosity that made him investigate sounds that could indicate other human presence in the seemingly empty wilderness. Timothy's approach to the source of gunfire revealed 3 white men on horseback surrounding a Lakota woman whose horse had been shot from beneath her, leaving her stranded and wounded in snow that would become her grave if she remained exposed to the brutal temperature. Her traditional dress and obvious injuries made her completely vulnerable to men whose intentions were clearly hostile rather than helpful. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with the dignity and bearing of someone accustomed to respect, rather than the cruel treatment she was receiving from men who seemed to view her as prey, rather than a human being in desperate need of assistance. Her attempts to defend herself were hampered by a wounded arm that left her unable to draw the knife at her belt. Timothy recognized the 3 men as buffalo hunters he had seen at the trading post during his only visit to civilization since his uncle's death, rough characters whose reputation for violence had made even hardened trappers avoid unnecessary contact with them. Jake Morrison, Pete Sullivan, and Dutch Kowalski were known for taking what they wanted, without regard for law or human decency in territory where authority was scarce. The boy's decision to intervene came from instincts his uncle had tried to instill about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, regardless of race or circumstances that might complicate such assistance. His father's teachings about Christian duty and his own sense of basic fairness made abandoning the woman impossible, despite the obvious danger to his own safety and welfare. Timothy's attack came from behind as he emerged from cover with his uncle's hunting rifle, his small size and youth making his intervention completely unexpected by men who had been focused entirely on their helpless victim. His first shot struck Jake Morrison in the shoulder, creating confusion that gave the woman opportunity to retrieve her knife while disrupting the hunter's coordinated assault. The buffalo hunters' initial shock at being attacked by a child gave way to rage as they realized their entertainment was being interrupted by someone they could eliminate as easily as their original target. Their superior numbers and experience making Timothy's courageous intervention seem futile despite its moral necessity. Their weapons and horseback advantage made the outcome seem inevitable despite his surprise attack. Timothy's second shot missed its target, but created enough distraction for the Lakota woman to wound Pete Sullivan with her knife. Their combined resistance transforming what had been sport for the hunters into a genuine fight for survival that tested their commitment to violence. When faced with determined opposition from unexpected sources, the boy's rifle jammed after his second shot, leaving him armed only with his uncle's skinning knife, while facing two mounted men whose fury at being challenged by a child overcame any rational consideration of retreat. His position among the rocks provided some protection, but couldn't compensate for their superior firepower and mobility in terrain that favored mounted combat over defensive positions. Timothy's desperate fight lasted only minutes before superior numbers overcame his courage and determination, leaving him bleeding and unconscious beside the woman he had tried to save. His intervention had wounded two of her attackers, but hadn't prevented the violence, though his sacrifice had demonstrated the kind of heroism that transcended age and cultural boundaries while inspiring responses he couldn't have imagined. The Lakota woman Timothy had risked his life to protect was Morning Star, a medicine woman whose spiritual gifts had been dormant since the death of her husband and children in a cavalry attack 3 years earlier. Her survival skills and traditional knowledge had kept her alive during years of wandering, but her heart had remained closed to the spiritual forces that had once made her powerful among her people. Morning Star's wounds were serious, but not fatal, allowing her to tend Timothy's injuries while the buffalo hunters debated whether to kill both witnesses or simply leave them to die in the wilderness cold that would eliminate evidence of their crimes. Her medical knowledge, learned through generations of healing tradition, gave her the ability to keep the boy alive despite his severe blood loss and exposure. Morning Star's traditional healing knowledge proved essential for Timothy's survival during the first critical hours after his heroic intervention, as she used herbal remedies and spiritual practices passed down through generations of medicine women to treat wounds that would have been fatal without proper care. Her gratitude for his sacrifice motivated extraordinary efforts to preserve the life of someone who had risked everything to protect a stranger. The buffalo hunter's departure left Morning Star and Timothy alone in the wilderness with injuries that required immediate attention and shelter that could protect them from winter weather capable of killing healthy adults, let alone wounded children and women. Her knowledge of survival techniques learned during years of exile provided solutions that Timothy's frontier experience couldn't match, making their partnership essential for mutual survival. Timothy's unconscious struggle against death lasted 3 days, while Morning Star maintained constant vigil beside him, using every healing technique in her extensive knowledge to combat infection and blood loss that threatened to claim the boy who had sacrificed himself for her protection. Her prayers during this period marked the first time she had sought spiritual assistance since losing her family, representing the beginning of her own healing process. The boy's gradual return to consciousness revealed the extent of his injuries, while demonstrating the effectiveness of Morning Star's traditional medicine, her treatment having prevented complications that would have resulted in permanent disability or death. His recovery validated healing methods that combined practical knowledge with spiritual practices she had abandoned during years of grief and despair. Morning Star's explanation of her identity and background helped Timothy understand that he had saved someone whose spiritual gifts had once been legendary among the Lakota people, though her powers had been dormant since personal tragedy destroyed her connection to the sacred forces that had made her a powerful medicine woman. Her story revealed depths of loss that made her current exile understandable, while highlighting the significance of his courageous intervention. Timothy's questions about Lakota culture and traditions provided Morning Star with opportunities to share knowledge she had thought permanently buried with her family. Their conversations during his recovery, rekindling memories of purposes and responsibilities she had abandoned in favor of aimless wandering. His genuine interest in her people's ways created the first meaningful human connection she had experienced since losing everything she held sacred. The spiritual awakening that began during Timothy's recovery manifested as dreams and visions that had been absent from Morning Star's life for years. Their return, marking the restoration of powers she had thought permanently lost to grief and despair. Her renewed connection to sacred forces was triggered by witnessing the boy's selfless courage and experiencing again the human goodness she had forgotten existed in a world that had shown her primarily cruelty. Morning Star's growing awareness of renewed spiritual gifts came with understanding that Timothy's sacrifice had been orchestrated by forces beyond human comprehension. His intervention serving purposes that extended far beyond simple rescue of one woman from violence. Her visions revealed that his courage had awakened something sacred that had been waiting for proof that goodness still existed in hearts pure enough to risk everything for others. The healing ceremonies Morning Star performed for Timothy's benefit demonstrated the return of powers that had made her legendary among her people. Her success in accelerating his recovery through spiritual intervention, proving that her connection to sacred forces had been restored rather than permanently severed by personal tragedy. Her renewed abilities carried responsibilities that extended beyond individual healing to encompass broader purposes she was beginning to understand. Timothy's complete recovery under Morning Star's care took 2 weeks, and established between them a bond that transcended cultural differences and age gaps, their shared experience of survival creating mutual respect and affection that would influence both their futures. His heroism had not only saved her life but had restored her spiritual gifts, while her healing had preserved his life and introduced him to wisdom traditions he could never have encountered otherwise. Morning Star's visions during Timothy's recovery revealed that her renewed powers carried obligations to return to her people and use her restored gifts to address spiritual crises that threatened their survival as a distinct culture. Her exile had ended not through personal choice, but through divine intervention that used a white boy's courage to restore abilities her community desperately needed for their continued existence. The practical preparations for Morning Star's return to her village included decisions about Timothy's future, as his uncle's death had left him without family or clear destination in territory where survival required either exceptional skills or community support. Her gratitude for his sacrifice and recognition of his character made abandoning him impossible, while her spiritual responsibilities made delay inadvisable for her people's welfare. Timothy's acceptance of Morning Star's invitation to accompany her to the Lakota village represented trust that overcame cultural prejudices and personal fears about living among people his own culture had taught him to consider enemies. His decision was based on respect for someone whose character he had come to know intimately and whose healing abilities had saved his life when no other help was available. The journey to Morning Star's village provided opportunities for her to teach Timothy essential skills for survival among the Lakota people, while preparing him for cultural experiences that would challenge every assumption he had been taught about Native American life. Their travel together strengthened bonds created during his recovery, while building anticipation for reunions and responsibilities that awaited them both in the village she had abandoned years earlier. Morningstar's return to her village after 3 years of exile created a sensation among the Lakota people, who had mourned her departure and struggled without the spiritual guidance her medicine woman gifts had once provided their community. Her arrival with Timothy Crawford, the white boy whose courage had restored her powers, challenged their understanding of divine purpose, while offering hope for renewal they had thought permanently lost to historical circumstances. The village's spiritual crisis had deepened during Morningstar's absence as disease, starvation, and government oppression had weakened their connection to traditional ways, while undermining their confidence in ancestral wisdom that seemed powerless against modern challenges. The people's faith in their cultural identity had eroded along with their physical strength, creating despair that threatened their survival as a distinct community. Chief Standing Bear's greeting of Morningstar mixed joy at her return with skepticism about claims that her spiritual gifts had been restored through intervention by a white child, his leadership requiring practical assessment of her abilities rather than emotional response to her presence. The village's desperate need for spiritual guidance made false hope more dangerous than continued despair, forcing careful evaluation of renewed powers she claimed to possess. Morningstar's demonstration of restored healing abilities came when she successfully treated several community members whose conditions had resisted traditional remedies for months, her success proving that her connection to sacred forces had indeed been renewed through Timothy's sacrifice. Her effectiveness validated claims about spiritual restoration while providing immediate benefits that began rebuilding community confidence in traditional ways. Timothy's integration into Lakota village life required adjustments that tested his adaptability, while demonstrating character traits that had motivated his heroic intervention on Morningstar's behalf. His respectful behavior and eagerness to learn tribal customs, earning gradual acceptance from people initially suspicious of white presence in their community. His obvious devotion to Morningstar helped overcome prejudices based on racial differences and historical conflicts. The spiritual ceremonies Morningstar conducted to formally acknowledge Timothy's role in her restoration created new understanding of how divine purposes could work through unexpected messengers, his courage being recognized as sacred action that transcended cultural boundaries. The community's acceptance of a white boy as instrument of spiritual renewal challenged their assumptions about racial identity while affirming universal principles about courage and sacrifice. Morningstar's renewed powers manifested most dramatically during a healing ceremony for children suffering from disease that had defied traditional treatment. Her success in curing illnesses that threatened the next generation, proving that her abilities exceeded anything she had possessed before her exile. Her enhanced gifts seemed designed to address the specific challenges facing her community in their struggle for cultural survival. The transformation of village morale began immediately as Morningstar's presence and demonstrated abilities restored confidence in traditional ways that had seemed inadequate for modern challenges. Her success proving that ancestral wisdom remained relevant when properly applied by someone with genuine spiritual connection. Her return marked the beginning of cultural renewal that extended beyond individual healing to encompass community identity. Timothy's role as witness to Morningstar's spiritual work provided validation from someone outside tribal culture. His testimony about her abilities carrying weight with both Lakota community members and government officials who had dismissed Native American spiritual practices as primitive superstition. His presence bridged cultural gaps while lending credibility to phenomena that challenged conventional understanding. The practical applications of Morningstar's renewed gifts extended beyond healing to include guidance about hunting, weather patterns, and strategic decisions that affected community welfare. Her visions providing information that helped the village adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining connection to traditional ways. Her spiritual insights addressed both immediate needs and long-term survival strategies. Morning Star's teaching responsibilities expanded as young people sought instruction in spiritual practices they had never properly learned. Her exile having interrupted transmission of knowledge essential for cultural continuity. Her return provided opportunities to preserve traditions while adapting them to contemporary challenges that required both ancient wisdom and modern understanding for successful navigation. The village's spiritual renewal attracted attention from neighboring Lakota communities who sent delegations seeking Morning Star's assistance with their own spiritual crises. Her reputation spreading throughout the region as someone whose powers exceeded anything seen in living memory. Her influence began extending far beyond her own village to encompass broader tribal spiritual revival. Timothy's education in Lakota spiritual traditions provided him with knowledge that bridged cultural gaps while preparing him for roles he could never have imagined when he lived alone in his uncle's cabin. His experiences demonstrating how individual courage could create opportunities for growth that transcended original circumstances. His integration into tribal life represented triumph over cultural prejudices through mutual respect and shared experiences. The culmination of Morning Star's spiritual restoration came during a vision quest that revealed her ultimate purpose as bridge between traditional ways and modern challenges. Her gifts being designed to help her people adapt to changing circumstances while preserving cultural identity. Her enhanced powers carried responsibilities that extended beyond healing to encompass leadership in cultural survival and renewal efforts that would influence future generations. The sunrise following Morning Star's vision quest brought revelation that her renewed spiritual powers were intended not just for individual healing, but for the transformation of her entire people's relationship with the sacred forces that had sustained them for generations. Her enhanced abilities carried obligations to guide the Lakota Nation through cultural challenges that threatened their existence as a distinct people with unique spiritual traditions and practices. Morning Star's announcement of her divine mission to the assembled village elders created both excitement and apprehension as they recognized the magnitude of responsibilities she was accepting while understanding that her success could determine their people's survival as a culturally intact community. Her willingness to shoulder such burdens demonstrated the complete restoration of her spiritual connection and commitment to serve purposes larger than personal welfare. Timothy's role in the village's spiritual renewal evolved from witness to active participant as Morning Star's teachings revealed his own latent abilities to bridge cultural gaps and facilitate understanding between peoples whose historical conflicts had prevented cooperation on matters of mutual interest. His courage had unlocked not just her powers, but his own potential for service that transcended racial boundaries. The healing ceremonies Morning Star conducted for the entire village demonstrated the scope of her renewed abilities as she addressed not just individual ailments, but collective spiritual wounds that had weakened their connection to ancestral wisdom and cultural identity. Her success in restoring community confidence proved that her gifts exceeded anything she had possessed before her exile, and Timothy's sacrifice had awakened them. Chief Standing Bear's formal recognition of Morning Star's restored status as the village's primary spiritual leader validated her claims about divine renewal while establishing her authority to guide community decisions about adaptation to changing circumstances that required both traditional wisdom and innovative approaches to survival. Her leadership would determine how successfully they navigated challenges that threatened their cultural continuity. The establishment of Morning Star's teaching circle attracted young people from throughout the region, who sought instruction in spiritual practices their own communities could no longer provide, creating opportunities for cultural preservation that extended far beyond her immediate village. Her influence on the next generation would determine whether traditional ways survived the pressures of enforced assimilation and cultural suppression. Timothy's adoption into the Lakota community was formalized through ceremonies that recognized his spiritual significance while establishing his permanent place among people who had learned to value character over racial identity through witnessing his courage and commitment to their welfare. His integration represented triumph over prejudices that had historically prevented cooperation between cultures that shared common values about honor and sacrifice. The practical applications of Morningstar's enhanced spiritual gifts included guidance about agricultural techniques, hunting strategies, and diplomatic approaches that helped the village adapt to reservation life while maintaining cultural identity and spiritual practices. Her visions provided information that enabled successful navigation of challenges that had defeated other communities lacking such supernatural assistance and practical wisdom. Morningstar's influence on tribal politics extended beyond her own village, as other Lakota communities sought her counsel about negotiations with government officials and adaptation to policies designed to eliminate Native American cultural identity through forced assimilation. Her spiritual authority provided foundation for resistance strategies that preserved essential traditions, while accepting unavoidable changes to lifestyle and economic practices. The network of spiritual renewal that spread from Morningstar's village to encompass multiple Lakota communities demonstrated how individual transformation could catalyze broader cultural revival when guided by genuine spiritual connection and commitment to collective welfare. Her restored powers had triggered renaissance of traditional practices that strengthened tribal identity while providing tools for survival in changing circumstances. Timothy's education in Lakota spiritual traditions prepared him for lifelong service as cultural bridge between white and Native American communities. His unique background and demonstrated character making him valuable for diplomatic efforts that required understanding of both cultures. His presence in the village provided living proof that cooperation was possible when people recognized common humanity beneath surface differences. The legends that grew around Morningstar's spiritual restoration and Timothy's role in awakening her powers became part of Lakota oral tradition, their story demonstrating how courage and sacrifice could unlock divine intervention in seemingly hopeless circumstances. Their partnership proved that spiritual forces recognized character rather than race when choosing instruments for sacred purposes that served collective welfare. Morningstar's legacy extended beyond her lifetime, as the spiritual practices she restored and the cultural renewal she initiated continued to strengthen Lakota identity through subsequent generations, her enhanced gifts having provided foundation for survival that enabled her people to maintain distinct cultural identity despite government efforts to eliminate Native American traditions. Her restoration had ensured cultural continuity that might otherwise have been lost to historical pressures. The transformation of both Morningstar and Timothy through their shared experience of sacrifice and spiritual awakening proved that individual courage could unlock collective renewal when motivated by selfless commitment to protecting others. Their story becoming testament to the power of moral action to create miraculous outcomes that transcended human understanding. Their bond had saved not just 2 lives, but an entire culture's spiritual foundation.